Almost a century ago, a brutal and secretive massacre shook the world. An entire royal dynasty wiped out in cold blood. Tsar Nicholas II, the former emperor and autocrat of all Russians, was brutally executed along with his wife, Empress Alexandra, and their 5 children. This heinous act took place in a house in Yekaterinburg, Russia, by the Bolshevik troops. This wasn't just an act of war, it was a carefully planned execution. But how did one of the most powerful families in the world end up meeting such a tragic end? Let's rewind the clock. The Romanov dynasty ruled Russia for over 300 years, first gaining power in 1613 during Russia's Time of Troubles, a 15-year period marked by chaos and foreign invasions for the country. Mikhail Romanov, the 16-year-old son of Russia's religious patriarch, was chosen to take over the throne. Fast forward to 1894. Nicholas II, the last Romanov Tsar, took his place. However, Nicholas II wasn't exactly considered a capable ruler. In fact, he was labeled as an insecure, weak, and submissive leader, and turned the Russian people against him. And so it was no surprise when, in 1904, Nicholas waged a war against Japan, only to lose. A year later, workers in the capital marched to protest unfair labor conditions. However, shots were fired at the crowd of innocent people, which led to hundreds and thousands of deaths. A sad state of affairs that became known as Bloody Sunday. And just like that, the public frustration had reached its peak. But Nicholas refused to listen. His wife, Alexandra, supported him through everything. One of their closest confidants was a mysterious monk named Rasputin, who gained influence by supposedly helping heal their son Alexei, who had haemophilia. Rasputin became so powerful, he even influenced government appointments. But he was hated by many, and in 1916 he was murdered under mysterious circumstances. Poisoned, shot, drowned? No one knows for sure. However, his passing did mark the fall of the first pillar for Nicholas. In 1915, Nicholas left Russia to personally take command of the army during World War I. In his absence, his wife looked over the matters of the country. The only problem was that Alexandra wasn't fully equipped to rule over a country at war. Her husband did not make things any better when he led the army into defeat and lost 1.7 million troops. By 1917, Russia was falling apart. Food shortages, war losses, and public anger led to massive protests. When soldiers were ordered to fire on protesters gathered on International Women's Day, they refused and turned on their officers instead. In the face of such crippling circumstances, Nicholas made the smartest decision he could in that situation. He renounced his throne, which ended the 304-year rule of the Romanovs over Russia. His palace was taken over by the revolutionary troops, and Nicholas II and his family were put under house arrest, at least in the beginning. However, the new provisional government wanted the Romanovs out of the country, and so they asked his first cousin, King George, to take him in, and he did. But King George had a change of heart. He moved the family from Tobolsk to a guarded house in Yekaterinburg. Its name, the House of Special Purpose. Inside those 4 walls, Nicholas and his family were supposed to be safe. They lived under strict watch and were robbed of their freedom. But that seemed like a small price to pay in the face of the alternative, or so they thought. During these trying times, the family held on to hope and to each other. Nicholas spent his days writing letters. Alexandra worried for their children, especially Alexei, whose health was getting worse. The 5 children, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, Anastasia, and Alexei, tried to stay cheerful, playing games and clinging to normal life. Outside, the political situation remained the same. The Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, had taken control over the country, and in their eyes, the previous royal family was a danger to the new government. Rumors spread. Some said the family had escaped. Others believed loyalists were planning a rescue. The Bolsheviks made their decision. The Romanovs had to die. And so plans were made. Sinister plans that unfolded on July 17, 1918. That day in the early hours of the morning, the entire family was asked to gather in the house's basement. Unaware of what was happening, they assumed it was for a photo. Nicholas stood there calm, whereas his wife held their son tight, trying to protect him from what was going to come for the family. The rest of the children held each other tightly. Their servants, including their family doctor and personal attendants, were also brought into the room where they were going to share the same fate as the Romanov family. For a while, silence filled the air. And then came the sound of boots, followed by gunfire. One of the Bolshevik soldiers who was ordered to kill the entire family had fired shots. Nicholas was killed first. Alexandra tried to shield her son. The children were shot, stabbed, and clubbed. Some survived the first round of shots, but were finished off with bayonets and bullets. It was a slaughter, but the tragedy was far from over. Instead of leaving behind any evidence of the atrocity, the family's bodies were loaded into a truck and were then taken to a secret location. The Bolshevik soldiers burned and buried the remains in graves in the Koptiaki forest. According to some resources, the bodies of the females were physically violated by drunk soldiers and were even searched for jewelry. Their faces were disfigured by blunt trauma from rifle butts, and quicklime was poured over the corpses. One of the soldiers decided that it was best if Alexei and one of his sisters were buried at some distance away from the main grave. Their bodies were burned, and the remains were then smashed with spades. After that, they were buried in a smaller hole. The saddest part? No one knew of the horrors that had transpired. For decades, the Soviet government denied everything. At some points, there were rumors about the family escaping the guardhouse. However, the truth came seeping out when a local geologist, Dr. Alexandra Avodin, discovered the remains in May 1979. He was able to discover the grave of Nicholas, his wife, and their 3 daughters. 3 skulls were initially unearthed, but these were later returned to the site. It wasn't until the fall of the Soviet Union that the truth began to emerge. DNA tests were conducted in '91, and the results were shocking. The Tsarina's DNA matched her distant cousin, Prince Philip of England. The Tsar's DNA matched his brother's remains, found in a separate grave. The Tsar had a CT-point heteroplasmy, which was a rare finding. However, it came in handy when authorities approved the exhumation and evaluation of the remains of the Tsar's brother, Georgy, who had died of tuberculosis at the age of 28 in 1899. Surprisingly, he had the same point heteroplasmy, which served as another piece of supportive evidence. There were some contradictory reports as well. During the assassination, Nicholas was wearing a handkerchief and a shirt, and conflicting results came forward when these 2 items were tested. The blood on the handkerchief didn't match that of Nicholas. Similarly, another piece of hair that was tested is thought to have been contaminated. However, the blood examination from the shirt had DNA evidence that matched the skeletal remains. Another group, headed by Knight, opposed the validity of the initial results as well. They had questions about whether collecting DNA evidence from a degraded sample was possible. They were also not able to match DNA taken from a finger bone, allegedly from Empress Alexandra's sister, to samples from Prince Philip. However, despite the opposition, experts confirmed the haunting truth. These were the Romanovs, or at least what was left of them. In 2007, a second grave was found, the one with the remains of Alexei and one of his sisters, confirming the fate of all 7 family members. The authorities managed to uncover 44 bone fragments and teeth at the site near the old Koptiaki Road, approximately 70 meters away from the main grave. An anthropological assessment revealed that the fragments belonged to a woman aged between 18 to 25 years and a boy aged between 10 to 14 years. The DNA analysis also found that these fragments had similarities to maternal descendants in current European royal families, proving that the remains belonged to Alexei and one of his sisters. And so, once the questions about the identity of the fragments were solved on July 17, 1998, 80 years after their deaths, the Romanovs were finally laid to rest in a state funeral at St. Petersburg's Peter and Paul Cathedral. However, the way his story came to an end raised several questions. Was such brutality necessary? Well, it depends on who you ask. For the Bolsheviks, it was a grim necessity. For monarchists, it was an unforgivable crime. Some members of the public demanded answers, but the Bolsheviks stood firm. They controlled the media and portrayed the Romanovs as the enemies of the people. They justified the execution by saying that they were trying to protect the new Soviet state against foreign intervention. And so the culprits never paid for their crimes. Nicholas's supporters tried to find some peace in the fact that in 2000, the Russian Orthodox Church canonized the family as passion bearers. Memorials and churches were constructed at the site of their deaths. At the end of the day, the Romanov execution remains a subject of fascination for historians and crime enthusiasts alike. Even decades later, some uncomfortable questions hang in the air. No direct written order from Lenin or Sverdlov has ever been found, though most historians believe the execution had central approval. But what do you think? Was this a local initiative or a decision from Moscow? Let us know in the comments section. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to our channel for more interesting videos like these. Until next time.